started now. My name is Lucy Ramsey. I am the Adult Programs Coordinator at the library, and we have a lot of people to introduce, so I'm going to just introduce the first one, Jamie Sawyer, who will introduce everyone else.
Sorry, official up here. Thanks everybody for joining us tonight for Ridgefield's Great Swamp Talk. Before I really get started, I'll just take a moment. I grew up in Ridgefield. I'm currently at the Norwalk River Watershed Association's Land Stewardship Coordinator and Community Engagement Coordinator, which means I get to put on programs like this. I'm also a graduate student at Antioch University studying international sustainable development and climate change. And I'm really excited to introduce everybody tonight, but first we will start off with, if everyone can join me welcoming our first selectman, Rudy Marconi, who will say a few words about the Great Swamp.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for inviting me tonight. The NRWA is a wonderful organization. We've worked with it for years. Interesting, we have Harbor Watch up here, as you can see, a wonderful program that tests the quality of our water, starting over at Roland Lane, basically, and all the way down through the outlet of our sewer plant, where it's the headwaters, really, the Great Swamp of the Norwalk River. So the quality of water that we discharge from that plant is vitally critical to the quality of life, the amphibious life in the Great Swamp. The Woodcock Nature Center goes without saying what a wonderful organization that is for the young people's programs, as well as just the trails that they have and the tremendous improvements they make out there. We had a little bump in the road with with the state of Connecticut and the lease having to do a complete survey of the entire property before they would in fact give us the lease, but that was completed. Jana, thank you very, very much for your work there. Accomplishment, believe me. But I've been asked to talk a little bit about the WPCA, the sewer plant, the improvements that are being made there, and the impact on the Great Swamp. Plus, we're doing, oh, the mic just came on. That helps a little bit. I can tone it down, maybe. We're doing two projects with the WPCA. Number one is the sewer plant upgrades. That's about a $48 million project. We're required by the state of Connecticut, Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, to do those upgrades every 20 years. When it came to 20 years, we began the process, and that was almost 5 years ago. It took a long time. The requirements established by DEEP are some of the strictest, if not the highest standards of any sewer plant in the state of Connecticut. We don't know why. It's costing us a lot of money to meet those restrictions on our nitrogen and our phosphorus discharges, but we're doing it, and it's going to be a wonderful program. It's for the future of the quality of the Norwalk River, obviously. Second to that is a pump line. We will be decommissioning our sewer plant on Route 7, which is behind the old Perkin-Elmer building. For those of you who are here long enough, remember Benris. That plant was built in conjunction with Perkin-Elmer. That will be discontinued. The pump line, the pump station will be increased in size, and a new pump line will be installed starting in a couple of weeks, a couple of weeks. That'll come out of the Pond's Edge today facility, go up Haviland Road, let's see, Haviland all the way to Limetown. We'll take a left and a right on Lee Road out to Farmyville, up to the bypass road, Leegee's Way, known today, and up to the sewer plant. The anticipation on that project is that the sewer line on Leegee Way will be installed, and as a piggyback, because the road will be closed for that installation, we will also be building a boardwalk along Leegee Way. We received about a $3.7 million, I had applied for it several years ago, $3.7 million grant to build this boardwalk. And the long range plan, hopefully short range now, will be to put the boardwalk in. That'll be connected to the 1 mile track around Parks and Rec Center. You'll walk, there'll be a sidewalk installed up to Cops Hill from the bridge to nowhere that exists now. But the sidewalk will be completed. You'll cross Route 35 down to Leegee Way, take the boardwalk with a sidewalk in the front of the recycling center, a switchback up along Schlumberger behind the Goodwill trailer, and then connect with the rail trail. So eventually you'll be able to walk around and down to Branchville and back if you so choose. Or you can run if you're still willing to do that. Or whatever you want to do. I don't know about the bikes. We still don't allow bikes on the rail trail, but we'll work on that for the future. I know a lot of the people are still against that. But the history of the Great Swamp is something that I remember as a kid growing up here. That was our town dump. And we brought everything there. That was before the days of environmental concerns and regulations, everything from your lawnmowers, and many of our parents in town here would go to the dump and come back with a load bigger than what they brought down because it was an exchange down there, really. People, you find lawnmower parts if your lawnmower needed wheels or a throttle cable or whatever it was. You spent several hours down there, and that was a big trip. The day your father went to the dump and spent some time down there scavenging around looking for whatever you could find that could be beneficial. Along with that, a lot of oils and everything else were dumped there. You know, there was no rules or regulations, as I said, and it impacted the quality of that facility. Additionally, we used to store all our salt outside. Now it's undercover in the barn. But that salt also contaminated a very good well that was right there on the property of the Department of Highway Public Works. That well had to be shut down. And what was interesting, fast forward to 1990, in and around there, the early 90s, a water main, wells were put in over at Norwalk River, for those of you who may not be aware of it, for drinking water. And that project was completed. However, one of the restrictions on the use of those wells is when the level of water, and I believe there's a rain gauge or water gauge up at the Pomperaug River in Southbury, when that gauge gets to a certain level during drought conditions, those wells at Norwalk Ridge have to be shut down. And the reason for that is that under Farmingville Road, there's literally a ridge line. And they don't want the water, the wells draw from the Great Swamp on the north side of Farmingville Road. If that begins to come down, they're afraid of a siphoning effect that will bring a lot of the contaminants, obviously, that have been there for years and years, into that area, and they would be pumping those out. So there are some restrictions. Very few people know about that. And I always ask Aquarium, where are we at with that? Are you monitoring it to be sure that we don't begin having that kind of impact? But the Great Swamp has a lot of history in our town. It was a playground of sorts. As kids, you always explored down there. I grew up on Prospect Street, right up the road here. And it was always a destination for a group of the neighborhood kids, whether you were trapping muskrats or just exploring. There's a road map that goes from Prospect Street extension that goes down to Quail Ridge. If you look at a map, there's actually a road map that goes right across the Great Swamp to the other side, obviously. I think, what is that over there? It's off of Farmingville, Blackman, in that area. But that will never be built, fortunately. But the Great Swamp is important to us. Currently, we have an issue, and the issue is the Foxhill Dam. For those of you who know where the Foxhill Dam, does everyone know where the Foxhill Dam is? When you go into Foxhill condominium, it's right on your right. That was built in the late 70s, part of flood control that the state came up with due to the flood of 55, I think it was. There were two dams built, one in Wilton, one in Ridgefield. The purpose was to help control floodwaters. The NRCS, National Resource Conservation Service, has, with its most recent computer models, hired a firm to come in to study the Norwalk River, and they currently use worst-case scenario of 33 inches of rain in a 24-hour period, which is incredible when you think about it. But that's what they're beginning to use. And under that scenario, when they plug that into the model, it changes the rating of the dam that would show that it would breach in those conditions, and the potential of 6 lives could be lost. How they do that on a computer, I have no idea. But anyway, they presented it. We had several meetings at Fox Hill last year, the year before. A lot of the people are, at Parks and Rec, we had the meetings. A lot of people are very concerned about that because what it does is the engineers told us that if they remove the dam, approximately 0.16 of an acre will be lost by every abutting property owner downstream to Ace Tire on Route 7. And they said it's not a lot, and we feel that could handle the worst case scenario. My question was, well, 0.16 of an acre is almost 20% of someone's property. If you have a small lot, that's a lot of room, a lot of land being taken. What about your septic systems? What about the wells? There are setbacks, etc. I don't think they did enough work on it. But it also could have an impact on the Great Swamp, because technically they will be lowering the water table in that area, or the storage capacity of that area, that I feel will impact wetlands, etc. So it's something to be of concern as we move forward. There's no decision yet. The NRCS has told the state of Connecticut. The NRCS is under the Department of Interior and responsible for all the dams in the United States. They have told the state of Connecticut that actually owns the dam that they have to make a decision now whether to A, remove the dam at a cost of approximately $1 million, which the NRCS funds, or to strengthen it to meet the 33-inch new computer models, which would require a concrete dam and a concrete wall to be built around the edge of Foxhill, which is crazy. There are also 2 houses at the bottom of Grade Hill, when you go down that road, that would have concrete walls around, along the river walls at that point, which I happen to feel would probably destroy the value of those homes. I don't know who would want to buy a house with a big concrete wall in the back, unless you loved handball or racquetball or whatever, you can make that a case. But so there's a lot going on, and a lot that can impact the Great Swamp, and it's an important source of wildlife for us. And it's very important that we keep our eye on that and preserve it for the future, many years to come. So that concludes what I had to say about the Great Swamp. I could tell you a whole lot more stories about it, but I won't embarrass Ed Carroll, who is here tonight. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Rudy, so much for joining us tonight and offering up your stories and expertise. I also have the privilege of welcoming Sarah Bresnan and Mary Donato, who will be joining me in this presentation. Sarah is the Director of Education at the Woodcock Nature Center in Wilton, where she teaches field trips, after-school programs, and guided hikes throughout the year, and directs camp in the summer. She also serves on the board of the Norwalk River Watershed Association and volunteers with invasive plant removal and native habitat restoration. She has a degree in environmental studies and a passion for conservation, education, and art. Mary is the Research and Education Coordinator at Harbor Watch, which is a program of Earthplace, a nonprofit organization in Westport. She has a bachelor's degree from the University of Connecticut in Natural Resources and the Environment with a concentration in climate and water resources. She has a background in wetland ecology research and education for all ages and is in her 3rd year as a member of the Harbor Watch team. Please join me in welcoming Sarah and Mary to the stage to kick off the presentation.
Hey, so hello everyone, I'm Sarah from the Woodcock Nature Center. Also with us, who I'm going to mention, is Jen Bradshaw from the Woodcock Nature Center, mostly known as Miss Jen, who that's how I'll say her name today, but she'll be helping us with showing some of our animal friends that we did bring, both mounted, and also we have some live animals that we'll be showing around as we go through our presentation. But I'm going to get started and first talk about where is the Great Swamp. I'm assuming most of us are Ridgefield residents, but if you don't know where it is or how far it extends, you can take a look at this map. And as Rudy mentioned, it is right behind the dump, the Ridgefield dump, and extends all through past the rec center. This photo on the side is taken from Farmingville Road, so if you live here, you probably drive past it almost every day. And it is also the start of the Norwalk River as well. So you can see up here, our Great Swamp starts there, and it is the beginning of the Norwalk River that runs all the way down to Long Island Sound. So it's very important. habitat. Really briefly, I'm going to talk about the difference between swamps and marshes, because many people use those words interchangeably, but they are different habitats. Swamps have woody plants. They have trees and shrubs. Marshes do not. That's the biggest difference. So if you see just a wet grassland area, that will be a marsh. They're mostly along the coastline, but there are freshwater marshes. But swamps will have those woody trees and shrubs. Swamps can also dry up in the summer, so they're not always visibly wet. And why are these places important? So all wetlands, swamps, marshes, ponds, streams are very important to a healthy environment. They support diverse wildlife, so many birds stop over for migration, many animals hunt there. We're going to talk more about the individual animals that live in our Great Swamp, but swamps themselves also act like big sponges, so they absorb rain and snowmelt. They help with storm damage and flood control. And the wetland plants that live there have really adapted over time to have very dense roots that help with erosion. They can trap sediment and actually filter out nutrients and excess chemicals. So the water that runs through our swamps actually is cleaner when it comes out of it. And the difference between a wetland and a watershed is actually an entire area of land. Wetlands are specific habitats, like our swamps and marshes, but a watershed is the entire area. So every drop of water that falls on that land or that runs through the groundwater, that's exiting in the same place. So the watershed includes everything, you and I, the animals, the houses on it, is the watershed. So we are in the Norwalk River watershed. As you can see in this map, there's major and minor watersheds. So in Connecticut, we are part of the major Housatonic River watershed up here, but then our minor watershed is the Norwalk River. So it all funnels down, and it starts at the Great Swamp. All right, so what lives in our Great Swamp? So I'm going to start with the smallest animals up to the largest. So often the overlooked and some things that people might not really love, but our insects and our creepy crawlies. And these really are the beginning of the food web of swamps and wetlands. So in this photo we have lots of dragonflies, damselflies, which are up here. They start their life cycle as aquatic larvae. So right here is our dragonfly nymph. This is a damselfly nymph. They live in the water, they're eating other insects, and they are shedding their exoskeleton. As they molt, they grow bigger and bigger and bigger, and eventually they'll pupate, crawl up on land, and have their wings unfold, their abdomen unfurl, and they turn into our dragonflies and damselflies. They're also a great source of food for many animals that live in the swamp. And then we do have all sorts of other critters, so snails. This down here is a six-spotted fishing spider. So they can run on water, they can dive in the water. They actually have specialized hairs under their abdomen that help them hold a bubble of air, so they can dive and still breathe while underwater. They can catch fish and tadpoles. And then we have some smaller things. So this is an isopod. If you've rolled over a log and found roly-polies, those are terrestrial isopods. We have aquatic isopods, so they're big into recycling nutrients, breaking down dead plant matter in the swamp. And this last one here is a Mayfly nymph as well. And you can see they have specialized, the Mayfly has a specialized gills on the side to help them breathe underwater. Okay, next is another insect, which this is my favorite insect ever. And I love telling people about this insect. This is a caddisfly. So here we have our adult caddisfly. They lay their larvae, their eggs, in the water. So it might be hard to make out, but this right here is the larva. Kind of looks like a grub. But the amazing thing about these creatures is that they build houses. They're one of the only insects that actually builds a house. So in my hand in this photo, you can see their houses are built out of these little leaves and twigs, and they do that through silk that they produce from their mouths. And that's for protection, for camouflage, so things don't eat them. But I had a video, this was a video, so you could see them moving. It won't play for some reason today, that's okay. But you could see the larvae sticking out of this home, and they'll thrash their bodies in the water to help the water move to oxygenate the water to go through their skin. But they're fascinating creatures, and right now in any swamp, if you go there, you will see that their little houses kind of moving along like little hermit crabs. I just think they're amazing architects. We love teaching our kids about the caddisflies. If you've gone fishing, you might use caddisflies as bait as well. And there's an artist that I urge you all to look up after this presentation, a French artist who collects caddisflies and will put them in a tank. He'll remove all of the natural substrate and put them in a tank with precious stones and gold. And you can see in this photo down here, they'll make their houses out of whatever's available. And then they grow up, so they leave their house, they discard it, and then they grow up into adults. He releases them into their normal habitat, and he collects their houses and makes jewelry out of them. So, fascinating. All right, we're moving a little bit bigger to our amphibians. So spring peepers are going to be found all throughout the Great Swamp, and they are very small, they're small as tree frog, but they have a very loud voice, which many of you might know, and I'm going to play their call for you. Oh, there we go. So they, one way to tell if it's a spring peeper, because we do have some other ground frogs or wood frogs here in Connecticut, is they have this X on their back, which you can see kind of clearly on this one. All of them will have some sort of X shape on their back, and that's one way you can identify them. We also have gray tree frogs, and Miss Jen actually has our friend Clyde, the gray tree frog, out on a stick. I'm amazed he's staying there.
Well, I've already been peed on, to be fair.
Okay.
You can't, that's what happens. But I'll come around.
Yeah, so
yeah, while you're talking.
Miss Jen's going to come around and show you the gray tree frog in real life. But they also are amazing climbers. You can see in this photo really well, they have those sticky suction cup toes that help them. And they, often people mistake their call for a bird. Oh, I went too far. Here is their call.
I love that.
And they are active calling now. So you might hear that call in your backyard, and that's our gray tree frog. They do also change color slightly from when they first crawl out of the water. They're this kind of really nice lime green color that helps them camouflage with younger leaves, and then they'll start to turn this mottled gray bark color as well. Two more frogs that often get confused are our green frog and bullfrog. They can look very similar. The way you tell the difference between a green and bullfrog is that the green frogs have this ridge right here down their back. And I remember that because the word green has an R in it for ridge. So that's my trick. Bullfrogs do not have that ridge at all. But other than that, they could look very, very similar. Green frogs can get to be almost as big as bullfrogs. Bullfrogs are a little bit bigger. And they're eating insects, but bullfrogs actually can eat anything that they can stick in their mouth. And Miss Jen and I actually, we have a story. We found snapping turtles that had hatched. They were coming out of the ground, out of their nest, and they were going down to the water at our nature center. We wanted to move them closer to the water so no one would step on them. So we scooped them up. We're releasing them by the pond and watching them start to swim away. And out of the blue, a bullfrog hopped out of nowhere and ate a baby turtle right in front of us. So it was horrifying and fascinating at the same time, but they are voracious eaters. They can eat other frogs. They basically can eat anything that they can get their mouth on. So here's the bullfrog call, and some people think it sounds like a cow. One student told me he thinks it sounds like a lightsaber. So if you're a Star Wars fan, you might agree with me or agree with them. And then our green frogs, they sound more like a banjo. one thing to note too, this is only true for the green and bullfrog, is that you can tell if it's a male or a female based on the size of their ear. So males will have a much larger ear compared to their eye, and the females will have an equal-sized ear to their eye. That's only true for these two types of frogs. All other frogs will have the same size ear for male and female. All right, turtles. So we brought a lot of turtles to show you all. And we're going to start with our painted turtle, which is the most common turtle in Connecticut and in the Great Swamp. So these two pictures are painted turtles. This photo is actually taken by Jamie of painted turtles in the Great Swamp off Farmingville Road. And this is a baby painted turtle that's really showing off their beautiful colors, which is where they get their name. We have a grown-up painted turtle named Van Gogh that Miss Jen is going to bring around, as well as a baby painted turtle found by our campers who named it Chicken Nugget. So Jen's going to walk around with them. They can be found in any wet area in Connecticut. Lakes, ponds, they're one of the earliest turtles to wake up from hibernation once the ice starts to melt. They can tolerate cold temperatures. And both of ours actually have an injury. They're both missing a leg. I'm not sure if you'll be able to see it as Jen walks around, but Van Gogh was found many years ago in our pond missing her back leg. And you can see that it's scarred over. She was not born this way, so it was probably from a predator that tried to catch her, but she got away. And then Chicken Nugget also has an injury, but we think he was born with it because it doesn't show any scarring. He's also missing a foot, but the skin looks like he was born that way. All right, now we have our snapping turtles, and Miss Jen will bring a baby snapping turtle out in a minute. But snapping turtles are our biggest turtle here in Connecticut. You can tell that they're snapping turtle by this really long tail. It's a long spiky tail. I think they look like dinosaurs. And they also, you'll see them more in marshes and swamps than you will kind of in open ponds because they like the muck and the mud. Their underbelly shell does not keep them protected. They have a very small undershell, so they have a lot of skin exposed, which is why they like to stay in the mud and the muck, keeping that skin exposed. They can live to be over 60, if not maybe 100 years old. There's often conflicts between people on how old they can actually live to be, but they can get very large. They can get as big as a car tire. But they start out very small. Their eggs are the size of a ping pong ball. And Miss Jen will bring out Storm, who's our baby snapping turtle, who's adorable. So they start out really cute and then just get bigger and bigger and bigger. And we also have all it's part of their skeleton, and it's part of their spine. So on that one, you can see the top part is broken away, so you can see the vertebrae that will connect to the ribs and attach to their bodies. And then lastly, we're going to meet our spotted turtle, Franklin. And spotted turtles are actually species of special concern here in Connecticut. There's not many of them left. They're not endangered yet, but they are a species that we are watching in terms of their population. They're a smaller turtle. They're quite vulnerable to predation from other animals because of their small size. So raccoons, muskrats, large birds can catch these turtles. But they also have a very low reproductive rate, so they only lay about 3 eggs each year. And many of the eggs in the nest get eaten. So there's just not a lot coming back into the population every year. But they are also, along with all of our turtles, have sometimes been the victims of the pet trade. So if you ever see a turtle out in the wild, do not make it your pet. Please. It needs to stay in the wild. It needs to mate and keep reproducing, especially the spotted turtles. Spotted turtles are also very sensitive to pollution and to poor water quality, which Mary's going to speak more about that when she comes up here. But Franklin is our spotted turtle. He has an adorable face. He has the cutest little black eyes. And he actually was a classroom pet. Miss Jen and I taught at a school, and he was in a tank, and we had to educate that teacher that she could not keep him as a pet. He was a protected species, but since he had been somewhat domesticated by living in the classroom, he couldn't be released back into the wild. So we took Franklin in, and he will be with us for the rest of his days. Okay. Snakes. Not everyone's favorite, but they are very important to the ecosystem in terms of pest control for both insects and mice. And in wetlands, we have our northern water snake, which is this black one on the right side. And they can change color through their lifetime. So younger snakes are much more mottled and checkered, as you can see in that bottom picture. And as they get larger and larger, their skin gets darker and darker. Some people confuse these for water moccasins. They are not water moccasins. They are not venomous. We only have 2 venomous snakes in Connecticut. The water snake is not one of them. So if you see them, there's nothing to be afraid of. They don't want anything to do with you. But they are great hunters. And they'll eat fish, frogs, insects, mice, shrews, all sorts of things. And actually their lifespan is unknown in the wild, but they can live in captivity up to 9 years, but we don't know how long they live actually in the wild. So that's our water snake, and then 2 confused species are our garter and ribbon snakes over here. So the top one is a ribbon snake, the bottom one is a garter snake. They're about the same size, can get up to about 2 feet. You may see them in your backyard, but they also are in marshes, in swamps. And the way you tell the difference between the garter and ribbon is, you'll have to get close. But the ribbon, so the ribbon snake kind of has a smoother pattern. You can see their stripes are very smooth. The garter snake is a little more checkered, but really the face gives it away. So the ribbon snake will have this white eye spot right in front of their eye, and their bottom lip will be really white. The garter snake does not have that eye spot as defined, and they have these vertical stripes down their lip. So really the lip is what gives it away. A white lip is our ribbon, and the stripes is the garter snake. But both of them eat amphibians and insects and even small rodents. So I like to tell people snakes are great for rodent control, which is also great to keep ticks at bay, because the ticks that are on the mice that they are eating are dying and helping with Lyme disease, with the spread of Lyme disease. So, okay, birds. Lots of birds love the Great Swamp. Lots of different songbirds. Too many for me to list today, but here are some of the most common ones: a red-winged blackbird, a swamp sparrow, a yellow-rumped warbler. Many other birds also will use them as stopovers in migration, but then we also have wood ducks, which will nest in cavities of the dead shrubs and trees that are in the swamps, as well as great blue herons will go there to hunt. And also our raptors will go there to hunt. So up top we have a red-shouldered hawk, and then a red-tailed hawk, and a barred owl. And red-shouldered hawks and red-tailed hawks have different calls. So I'm going to play them for you. The red-tailed hawk is probably the most common bird call. It's often used in movies as the call of an eagle. Where's my mouse go? My mouse disappeared. Okay, there we go. Red tail. And that quintessential hawk call, that's our red tail. And they usually only do one long call. And the red-shouldered hawk does multiple calls at once. There we go. So if you hear that repeated call, that's most likely a red-shouldered hawk. And then barred owls love to go to swamps because they really like eating crayfish, frogs, and snakes, all which can be found there. So our barred owls have a very distinct call that sounds like, "Who cooks for you?" Okay, mammals. we have, this is a weasel, and below it is a mink. Weasels have this white belly, minks do not. They are both small and should not be confused with river otters, which in front here is a taxidermied river otter. Minks are much smaller, so this is a mink pelt, which you can touch later on. So they're much smaller in size. River otters do not live in the Great Swamp. They might travel through, but they need running water, running and moving water. Same with beavers will not be in the Great Swamp, but what will be is muskrats. So this little guy is a muskrat. They're much smaller than beavers, and they don't have that flat tail. They kind of have this rat-looking tail. And then mice will be everywhere. So I threw a little white-footed mouse up there. But star-nosed moles are common, found in swamps. And they're actually semi-aquatic moles. So they're really great swimmers. They like wet areas, and they can tunnel through the muck and the mud. They'll build their nests on like a higher little mound. But they're great at swimming through swamps. And they'll be eating worms and bugs, and they get their name from the start, from those little tentacles on their nose, and those are actually feelers, and are feeling the muck and the mud, and they can sense and feel those insects in there before they snatch them up. And then we have some predators that will be passing through the Great Swamp as well. So all of our large predators are bobcat, black bear, red fox. Over here is a gray fox mount, and then we do have a red fox fur. The gray fox is slightly smaller than the red fox, and they have a black tip to their tail, and the red fox will have a white tip to their tail. Gray foxes are not often seen as much as red foxes. They're more secretive. They can climb trees. But both of them will be going to the Great Swamp to hunt for their food. Same with bobcat. Anyone seen a bobcat? Ridgefield has a very healthy bobcat population. The bobcats are not going to attack your small dog. Their main prey is actually rabbits. Rabbits, squirrels, chipmunks. And we have two beautiful bobcat mounts up here that I encourage you to come up and touch and feel after the presentation. They're very soft. They're my favorite animal. And black bear will also be passing through. Black bears are omnivores. They actually eat anything. They'll eat acorns and berries along with carrion and other small animals. And deer. Deer will be passing through. Okay, lastly, before I turn it over, I'm briefly going to talk about plants in the Great Swamp. Unfortunately, the Great Swamp has kind of been taken over mostly by invasive plants. So this large photo down here, most of what you see climbing over everything is bittersweet, which is an invasive vine. These are the berries up here. As well as Phragmites, which is a highly invasive reed. And there's a smaller picture up here of it too. So that's really taken over a lot of what you see on the side of the road if you're on Leegee's Way, are all of these invasives. And the bad thing about bittersweet is it can climb up these trees and knock them down, choke them out, and really just decimate everything in the area. There are some natives that we've seen along the edges when we took a field trip to the Great Swamp. And these are some of them here. So the button bush, which has these great flowers, it's great for pollinators. This is winterberry, a great source of food for the birds. Our native cattails. So unfortunately, the Phragmites reed is really taking over a lot of our native cattail stands. But cattails are very important for a lot of animals eat the rhizomes and the young leaves. Birds will nest in them. Things will use the fuzzy seeds for nesting material. And then down here is a pussy willow. And you can see all the pollen on those catkins and all the bees flying around. So those are also very important pollinator plants. And they're one of the earliest bloomers, too. So all of our early bees that are waking up need those willows with that pollen. So threats to the Great Swamp. Mary and Jamie are going to talk a little bit more about this. But pollutants, pesticides, fertilizers, litter, We often find like balloon strings in our wetlands at the nature center, which turtles can eat, think they're a worm, and choke on them or get their stomach impacted. Invasive plants I mentioned, habitat fragmentation, but anything that's going into the Great Swamp and into the water is going into these animals as well, and also flowing down the Norwalk River and affecting everything downstream of it. So I'm going to pass this over to Mary to talk more about water quality.
Hello everyone, so I'm Mary and I'm part of Team Harbor Watch, and I'm excited to be here tonight to talk about water quality. I'm primarily going to talk about water quality of the Norwalk River, and I'm going to kind of zoom in on some of our sites that are right around the Great Swamp. So why do we care about water quality? As I'm sure most of you know, there are a lot of reasons for us to be really passionate about water quality. Health, both for ourselves and for the organisms that live in the area. Biodiversity, as Sarah talked about, there's a lot of different organisms, whether they be animals or plants, that are really dependent upon good water quality. Recreation, for people who are swimming, boating, fishing, all sorts of things. Food production, not just for fishing, but for things like oysters and other seafood that people rely on for food, can be really impacted by water quality. And then also things like travel, art, and culture. So first I'm going to start off by talking about Harbor Watch. If anyone is not familiar, we are a water quality research and education program, and we're part of Earth Place in Westport. So we work throughout Fairfield County, but we also do some projects that extend beyond Fairfield County to other parts of Connecticut. And our mission is to improve water quality and ecosystem health in Connecticut. And we do that in quite a few ways. This is just kind of a little sample of some of the projects that we work on. So up in this top left corner, you can see some of our high school students that work with us collecting some river samples. So a big component of what we do is education for high school students and college students. And sort of the bread and butter of our program is this river monitoring. And that's primarily what I'm going to talk about and share with you today. Below that picture, we have a former staff member and some of our college students, and they are conducting some of our harbor monitoring. In this picture, they're getting some sampling for our fish study. And up here on the right at the top, that's some of our staff working on our marsh project that we're currently doing. So we're working in some salt marshes and looking at restored salt marshes versus natural salt marshes, excuse me. So we're really excited to wrap up that project and see what we learn and what we can find. And then below that here, this last picture is of our director, Nikki, and she is conducting a track down project in this picture, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that a little later towards the end of my presentation. But basically, when we do our river monitoring and we find a problem, we'll often conduct this kind of track down project, which helps us to track down sources of pollution, and then we can hopefully fix them. So that's a very exciting thing that we do, so I'm happy to talk about that towards the end. So as I said, primarily tonight I'm going to talk about our river monitoring. And we do collect a lot of different types of water quality parameters, but mostly what I'm going to talk about today is our bacteria data, because that is what drives a lot of our track down projects. So we collect water samples all throughout our field season, which runs from May to the end of September usually, so we're just about to start. Next week's our first week. So all of the water samples that we collect, we bring back to our state-certified lab in Westport, which we're very, very proud of, and we analyze those samples for indicator bacteria. So the units that I'm going to talk about are a little strange. They're not really used for a lot of other things, but we measure bacteria in something called MPN per 100 milliliter, which is the most probable number of bacteria colonies in that sample. So when I say indicator bacteria, what I'm primarily talking about for the Norwalk River, because all of our sites along the Norwalk River are freshwater sites, so bacteria concentrations are E. coli. So a lot of us are pretty familiar with what E. coli is, but it can indicate the presence of a lot of harmful bacteria and viruses and pathogens that are a lot harder to test for. So we use it kind of as a proxy so that it can indicate when we know that there are other issues in that waterway. So it's a lot cheaper and easier to test for than those other things, but we kind of know if we find E. coli that those other dangerous things are probably also there. And usually when we find high counts of E. coli, that indicates for us that there's probably human waste, like sewage, for example, leaking into a waterway. So obviously that's a problem. We don't want that. So when I talk about in the rest of my, there's going to be a lot of maps, and a lot of numbers. So I just want to kind of set us straight here right at the beginning. I'm going to talk about 2 different types of criteria. And I've circled that kind of yellow area so that we can focus in on that, because there's a lot of different regulated ways to look at water, and we at Harbor Watch look at the classification called all other recreational uses. So we're not looking at drinking water or a beach that has a lifeguard or anything like that. We're looking at all other recreational uses, and there are 2 criteria that the state has that water has to pass, or a number it has to be below to be considered healthy and clean. So one of those is a single sample maximum, which is a number we want the bacteria to be below on any one given day for one sample, and that is 576, most probable number. The number that we're mostly going to talk about today is the geomean, which is a geometric mean, and that has to be less than 126, most probable number. And so our geomean is for an entire season. So we look at one geomean for May through September. So before I get into all of the maps and all of the data, we do release a Fairfield County River report every year, and it's available online. So the last few years are available on our website right now. But there is one physical copy in the back if anyone wants to kind of filter it. But last year, in our 2021 field season, we looked at 14 different rivers that spanned 16 different towns. So we covered a pretty good amount of ground last year. I'm primarily, again, going to talk about the Norwalk River. But first, I want to look at some of our greater Fairfield County data. So this map shows whether or not certain sites passed both of those numbers I talked about a minute ago, or if it failed one or both of them. So each little dot on this map indicates one sampling site that we have. And you'll notice that the green ones are their bacteria concentrations were below both of those criteria numbers, and the red circles indicate site that failed one or both of them. So something that's interesting to note is that sites that are further south or closer to the coast are the ones that are more consistently above those numbers, which is not particularly surprising if you think about as a river kind of runs down, different problems can be added and compacted. And so we kind of expect that if there are sites that are going to pass, they may be upstream from the sites that are not passing. And you also notice that the sites that are red, that are exceeding those criteria, tend to be in places that are a little more densely populated or near highways and more industrial areas. So this map, I'm going to go back and mention that geomean number I talked about before. This map shows all of our sites in Fairfield County and sort of what range they fell in. So again, the sites that have passed the geomean are in green, and the sites that exceeded that criteria are in either yellow, orange, or red. So one thing that's kind of interesting to note is that the yellow sites have exceeded the criteria, so technically they kind of failed that criteria, but not by very much. And then the orange sites are a little more bacteria concentration, a little worse, and those red sites are anywhere between 1,000 to any number. So some of our counts can get pretty high, but we can have a little bit of confidence in that a lot of those sites that were red on that last map are not red on this one, which does feel a little better when you look at it in these kind of numbers. So again, that magic number we're looking at for the Norwalk River is 126. So here's the Norwalk River watershed. As Sarah mentioned, a watershed is any land area where the precipitation and the water is draining to a common water body or a common point. So here on this map, you can kind of see that it's broken up into 3 different sections. So we have the Norwalk River, the Comstock Brook branch, and the Silvermine River branch. So in 2020, Harbor Watch tested all 3 of those. This past year, 2021, we did only do the main stem of the Norwalk River, but we have data in 2020 if anyone's interested in those other 2. And so this watershed is roughly 40,000 acres. It is a very large area of land that is all draining down into one point. So as you can imagine, we want to be really cognizant of everything that's happening across that entire area. So now we're going to get into some numbers, into some data. So for the past 3 years, the Norwalk River has had 10 sites that we've tested every single time. In 2019, 73% of those sites failed, they exceeded those criteria. In 2020, 50% of them exceeded the criteria, and in 2021, 40% did. So that's nice to see. That number is dropping, and we're having less and less sites that are failing those criteria each time. Here's another figure. So those black bars in the bar graph represent the bacteria concentrations, and that gray line is rainfall. So you can see for the last 10 years that there has been some fluctuation, but for these last few years, that number of the bacteria concentration has been dropping pretty consistently, which is nice to see that water quality is improving. One thing that we do see a lot is that our bacteria concentration can sometimes follow the trend of rainfall. So when we get a lot of rain, a lot of precipitation, it can flush a lot of things into the water, and then we see that reflected in our data. So now we're going to talk about, kind of zoom into the Norwalk River itself. So these are our 10 sites on the Norwalk River, and this is the results for 2021, which appear in our river report. You can see all of those green sites have passed the geomean. They are underneath that number of 126, and there are 4 yellow sites there, and those have exceeded it. However, they're yellow, so they haven't exceeded it by very much. And then I have this a little bit smaller map. I've kind of circled in red the area that the Great Swamp is in. So we have one site that was within the swamp, but a number of sites kind of surrounding it along the Norwalk River. So we do get data from both inside and outside of the swamp. And so these numbers are all geomeans for each of those sites in the last few years, and I have highlighted in red the ones that are above that magic number of 126. One thing to note is that none of those numbers in red are much higher than 126. In order to get to that sort of orange zone, it has to be 500. So they're all pretty solidly in that yellow zone. So they've exceeded the criteria not by a whole lot. So in 2019, 4 of these sites of interest here were above that number. But in 2020 and 2021, only 2 were, which is an improvement, and it's good to see. Something that you may have noticed is that in every single year, Norwalk 21, which is our site inside of the swamp, has exceeded the criteria. And you know, that doesn't look great, but no reason to panic, because we think that high counts of E. coli at that site may not be from a sewage leak or some kind of human waste, getting into the water. It's probably from animal poop. There's a huge concentration of wildlife, as Sarah talked about, and the water in the Great Swamp moves much more slowly than at all our other sites. A lot of our sites is very rushing, and it slows down a lot, spreads out, and is a lot more slow moving through the swamp. So we're not too worried about it, because it's probably just kind of nature taking its course. Tools like DNA analysis could help us understand the specific sources of bacteria. But looking at our data that surrounds the area, we don't necessarily feel like it's necessary to go through that, because it does take a lot of resources and a lot of time. So we're pretty confident that there isn't like a big sewage leakage area, big stormwater area. So when we find some big source of pollution, what do? So Harbor Watch, if we believe that those high bacteria counts are from a point source, we contact our town partners. We conduct a track down project, like I mentioned before, and this picture of Nikki is back, to locate the broken pipe or some other issue, some spill that is happening, and we report our findings about where we think the problem is back to the town that it's happening in. And then after it has been fixed, or we've been told that it's fixed, we follow up with further testing to make sure that things have improved. However, we think high bacteria counts may be from a non-point source. It's a lot harder to track down a source like that. And so it could be things, like I said, like the animal poop in the Great Swamp, or it could be from septic systems, it could be from road runoff. There's a lot of different ways that bacteria could be getting into a particular space. So solutions for that need to be a little more widespread, get a lot more people involved, a lot more people within the community. But again, we would follow up with further testing if we believe that to be an issue. So this picture here that I have of our 21 site is probably taken from probably the same spot that the first picture that Sarah had was taken from. But it is really beautiful, and we love that site on our frequency. It's so nice. So really quickly, I want to compare the Norwalk River to another river that we test every year. So the Norwalk River that we test covers 3 towns, Norwalk, Ridgefield, and Wilton, 40,000 acres. In comparison, we'll look at a little bit about Ash Creek, which goes through Bridgeport, Fairfield, and Trumbull, and is just under 10,000 acres. So there is a big difference there in size that's being drained, the sort of the watershed size in that area. So we have 10 sites in the Norwalk River, 12 in Ash Creek, and while 40% of the Norwalk River sites exceed that criteria for bacteria, 100% of the sites in Ash Creek do. So we'll do a little bit of a comparison. So you can see on these 2 maps, there's a huge difference between these 2 places. You see the Norwalk River, as we said, most of those sites are green, below that number, and we have a couple of yellow sites. In Ash Creek, the yellow site is our cleanest site. That's the one we're happiest with on that river. And you'll see a majority of those sites are red, so they're in that 1001 or higher bracket. So we do a lot of track down projects in Ash Creek. We've had some success tracking down different sources of pollution, but there's a huge difference here. And so when you're looking at this data of the Norwalk River by itself, you may think, oh, we have to fix those yellow sites, we have to figure out what's going on. But then when you look at other rivers, you kind of realize that in comparison, the Norwalk River is doing pretty good. It looks really, really nice. And that is absolutely no coincidence, because there are a lot of people who are working really hard to make sure that the Norwalk River is doing really well and is looking very nice, including the Norwalk River Watershed Association, the Watershed Initiative, the towns of Wetland and Ridgefield, the city of Norwalk, and a lot of individual groups and residents who are doing an absolutely amazing job. And we appreciate it because we love to see those nice low numbers of impacts. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Jamie.
Right. So as Mary mentioned, looking at that Norwalk 21, because it is the start of the Norwalk River, we do really want to be mindful of what that's looking like. And so according to DEEP, faulty septic systems are actually responsible for 15% of the E. coli, 36% of the nitrogen, and 59% of the phosphorus coming into the Norwalk River. And so you might be wondering what these numbers really mean. In 2018, 43 marine beaches in Connecticut were closed throughout the season due to E. coli testing. And harvesting oysters is a Norwalk tradition, but 1 inch of rain in a 24-hour period closes conditionally approved areas for 7 days for recreational use and can be even longer for commercial harvests. So when nutrients such as nitrogen and phosphorus, even though they are essential for plant and animal growth, the overabundance of nutrients as a result of possibly leaking septic systems and long care process called eutrophication, where there's an overgrowth of algae resulting in dense layers of scum on the water. And these algae blooms can smell bad, they can block sunlight, they can even release toxins in some cases. And so when the algae die, they are decomposed by bacteria, and this process consumes the oxygen dissolved in the water and needed by fish and other aquatic life to breathe. So if enough oxygen is removed, the water can become hypoxic. Thanks. The water can become hypoxic, and where there's not enough oxygen to sustain life, creating a dead zone. And so this causes low dissolved oxygen and food web disruption, as well as the loss of recreational revenue and added drinking water treatment concerns. But as you can see, and as Rudy kind of talked about earlier, it's been an uphill battle for the swamp. It was once the town's dump. Now it has the wastewater treatment plant and the transfer station right next to it. And almost all of the stormwater from town is actually emptied out into the swamp. But there is good news. As Mary mentioned, the Norwalk River is improving, and in retrospect, it's doing pretty well in comparison. But for our swamp, particularly, the town is updating their wastewater treatment plant, the transfer station is installing a solar-powered composting system, and the state is updating stormwater runoff regulations. So here's where you can help too. There are a few simple steps to take that can tremendously help the health of the Great Swamp and the Norwalk River. By regularly maintaining your septic system, which I know is a really fun topic, you can help restore and protect the health of the river, which will help prevent some of these issues. The first step is to get your septic inspected. This is critical to knowing if your septic needs to be pumped or repaired, and it's important that you don't wait for your system to fail to call for service. A typical septic system can be serviced every 2 to 5 years by a septic system service provider, and is typically between $250 and $500. But that's really nothing compared to replacing or repairing a malfunctioning system, which can cost between $5,000 and $30,000 or more. So just like changing the oil in your car, preventative septic system maintenance will extend the life of your system for a small cost compared to the cost of replacing the system as a whole. So here are a few things you can do to help maintain your septic system every day. Starting with think at the sink. Consider what you put into your toilet and sink and the impact it may have on your system. Many common household items can either clog your system or kill the microbes that treat the wastewater. Also, don't strain your drain. All the water a household sends down its pipes winds up in its septic system. This means that the more water a household conserves, the less water enters the septic system. Efficient water use can not only improve the operation of a system, but it can reduce the risk of failure as well. Lastly, shield your field. Keep your car and anything heavier than your lawnmower off your drain field. Plant trees away from the drain field since tree roots can clog the field and cause the system to fail. So you may be wondering, why do you want to worry about maintaining your septic? Truly, it comes down to it can save you money, it protects your property value, it protects your and your neighbor's well water, and it protects your and your neighbor's health. So our goal here is really to maintain our septic system and really help with preventing those leaks and ultimately preventing those failures. So one thing to look out for is that the foul odor isn't always the first sign of a malfunctioning septic system. Make sure that you call a qualified professional if you notice any of the following: wastewater backing up into household drains, bright green spongy grass on the drain field even during dry weather, pooling water or muddy soil around your septic system or in your basement, or a strong odor around the septic tank and drain field. Unfortunately, when it does fail, you know, but the hard part of that is that sometimes they tend to fail gradually. And so once you smell it, that's really game over. But if it's just leaking, it may be causing environmental issues and property damage. So proper maintenance hopefully is going to help prevent that and continue the health of the overall system. So I know there's been a lot of information today, and septic is not always the first topic anyone wants to talk about. But here are a few ways that we can continue to help improve the Norwalk River and protect the Great Swamp. Maintain your septic, conserve water, use non-toxic products, and reduce the use of fertilizers and pesticides. Dispose of chemicals properly, choose native plant species, volunteer for river cleanups and native planting events, join or support your local watershed groups, and spread the word. So thank you all so much for joining us this evening. I'll open it up to any questions. Here's our contact information. Anybody have any questions on water quality? Yes?
In many areas, you see stands of dead trees that were like off Leegee Way and in the Great Swamp. Is that because the water level? I mean, they were big trees at one time. I mean, relatively. What's killed them?
I don't know exactly. I don't know if either of you have any insight onto that, but I would like to think that it has to do with the water quality and that along with the invasive species, it's just been a not well taken care of area, whether, you know, starting with it being the dump and now there are still contaminants. It's just a not well cared for habitat.
Well, some swamps used to be forest land as well. So that's usually the swamp areas where you see large trees that are dead were once forest. And beavers are usually the source of that. So they'll dam up the river and it'll block the water, it'll spread it out, and beavers can actually create swamps. Historically, I don't know how long the Great Swamp has been here, but
Probably when the dam went in.
when the dam, okay.
Water level
Or, yeah, so not only beavers, but human dams as well can cause swamps, so, yeah.
And probably the bittersweet may also be taken.
Could be soggy soil as well, bringing on a fungus. A lot of pine trees, spruce especially, are prone to fungus on damp and soggy soils. Because they could be citrus trees, they may have to do the same thing, but again, I think it's soggy soils that are killing the roots.
So I have bittersweet in my crop. I'm getting rid of it.
It is an uphill battle. Louise, I don't know if you want to touch on some of the invasive. I'm sorry, what was that?
Looking back at kids who not answer. I think what is really
we just, we're starting to cut it, we're cutting it now, but leaving the roots high above the ground so that we can come back in July and paint with glyphosate. Or we are, because that's when the sap is going up now, you want to cut, but you don't want to paint now, because you want it going back down. So July and after July is the best time to paint it. Or if you don't want to use glyphosate, just keep cutting them. Cut the vines. Every time you see them come up, just cut them.
And probably not pulling them out, because then you can break branches. If you just cut it at the bottom and then cut it again, right?
Right.
So that it's
So like 18 inches between the two cuttings.
And you said when you leave 3 feet off the ground, you paint it? Is that what you
Yeah, we use glyphosate, which is what's in Roundup, and we just take a paintbrush and we just paint the stem, and that will kill the root of the bittersweet.
The reason it's so difficult is the roots are actually a rhizome, not a root. It's like grass. So if you cut it here, it'll go over there, it takes it to the roots. So you got to be very selective as you cut it and how you paint it.
And if you, again, if you don't want to use the glyphosate, which I completely understand, just keep cutting.
Well, thank you everybody for coming. We have some friends we can visit in the front, and thank you so much.